So we woke up at the AMC Highland Center pretty excited because we were about to start the presidential range, which is 17 miles and much of it above tree line. So I was with Spider and El Alto and Chili Pepper, and we went out and tried to get a hitch and couldn't get one. I got very frustrated and started walking and walked the entire 3.5 miles to the trail. They finally got a hitch about a half hour after I left them. And we all met at the trail and then started up the mountain range, which was started off as a beautiful day. Got a little overcast later, as you'll see, but it started off good.
All right. Well, this is some of the steepest we've ever seen. Should be interesting.
There are a lot of bogs in the White Mountains, and this was one of the longer and deeper ones, as Al Alto will show you there. We never fell into a bog, but we did know a guy that did. It wasn't this one he fell into, but another one, and it was not as deep as this one, but he was covered, and it was disgusting. You don't want to fall into a bog. Because we got a late start to the day and because Chili Pepper had taken a fall and had hurt her hip a little bit, we decided to call it a day after about 5 or 6 miles when we arrived at the mikvah hut where we were having a little bite to eat and decided to ask if we could help them out with any chores. And they let us wash some dishes and then gave us some food for that and then asked us if we wanted to do a work for stay, which for a through hiker is where you do some chores in exchange for food and for lodging. So you usually get to sleep on the floor, but in the mikvah hut, they have a little game room or a library that they let through hikers that are doing work for stay sleep at it, which is where we slept. And we had a great time. And again, the AMC employees there were just spectacular and so generous and wonderful to us. So we got an early start the next day. We were going to be going over Mount Washington, so we're really excited. Mount Washington is one of the highlights of the trail and is boasts some of the worst weather in all of America. I think they have the world record for the highest wind speed ever recorded at 231 miles an hour. So it can be pretty difficult up there, and we didn't know we were going to get that day. I think there's only 2 or 3 days a year they say that it's not in the clouds. It's so high up at over 6,000 feet. But to get there, we had to go over a lot of ridge line exposed above tree line, and much like Franconia Ridge, but this had a different feel to it. Some of it looked like Franconia Ridge from a distance, but when you're in it, it feels different. And I kept saying as I'm walking through there, which is where I am right now, that it felt like I was in an episode of Game of Thrones. I don't know why, but that's what it felt like to me. As we get closer to Mount Washington, more of it's becoming visible, and you can see in the upper right hand corner in front of the cloud there some of the weather towers on top of Mount Washington. And as we get closer, I had a revelation that I wanted to share with you, and it has to do with pilgrimages. As those of you that have been following me from the beginning know, I've looked at this through hike as a pilgrimage for myself, much like the Camino was. But I've always had a hard time reconciling the fact that, unlike the Camino and other pilgrimages around the world, the Appalachian Trail doesn't end in any kind of special spiritual place, much like Mecca or the Santiago de Compostela, where the bones of Thomas are said to be interred. So the Appalachian Trail doesn't have that. But then I realized actually it does. And it was my way, this journey up to Mount Washington that made me realize it because I realized I'm walking metaphorically through American history toward the very first president of the United States or the mountain named after him. And after that, I'm going further. And the Appalachian Trail ends actually further back in American history, long before Europeans ever settled here. Because Mount Katahdin is actually the Native American name for the mountain. And Katahdin means greatest mountain. And if you take that a step further, who lives on the greatest mountain but their greatest God? And so I have a whole new, I haven't quite figured it all out yet, but this revelation has struck me as meaningful, and I'm going to spend some time thinking about it. So that last push up Mount Washington, which took about an hour, was really difficult, and but not as difficult as dealing with the crowds once we got on the top because it is just swarming with people, which is very disconcerting for a thru hiker who hasn't been dealing with crowds like this for a while. But there's a railroad that brings people up here, so it's relatively easy. And most of these people up here have not climbed it; they've taken the railroad. So we don't really spend a lot of time. We did eat. There's a nice cafeteria, so we did eat and headed on down, which was beautiful. We got some of the best views that we've gotten in the entire Appalachian Trail. More of the presidentials in the background there. We got to see the railroad in action, and it was just a beautiful way down. This is an area called Thunderstorm Junction, and I was so taken with it that I stopped for quite a while and took these images. And I was all alone for the half hour or so that I was there. And I just laid under there and looked at these clouds that looked like they were going to form into thunder clouds, and they didn't. But I just sat there and stared, and I realized that I was witnessing so much power. I felt it through every fiber of my being. I felt this power, and I realized a thought came to me that this is what creation is like. This is the power behind creation. It looks something like this, and then I realized that this power is all around. This power, maybe not as visible, but it's in everything from the trees to the plants to the flowers to the animals to us. And the world is in a constant state of creation. And it seemed very important to me, and I don't want to forget this.